Chain Management, the James A. Haslam Chair of Logistics at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, Tennessee. I also serve as the co-faculty director of the Global Supply Chain Institute here at UT. Our featured speaker today is John Santagate. John is Vice President of Robotics for Kerber Supply Chain. Prior to joining Kerber in 2019, he held senior executive positions with leading industry research and consulting organizations, and he's fulfilled a variety of roles in research, consulting, distribution, product development, engineering, and sales. John's also an educator. He serves as a member of the teaching faculty at his alma mater, the University of Massachusetts in Lowell. He's also a veteran speaker here in the Kerber Masterclass series, having served as a subject matter expert in several other master classes. John, it's great to have you back with us today.
Always happy to be here talking about neat technology, Tom.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to get into that neat technology here in just a few minutes, but please allow me to share with people why we're here. Perhaps we've got some first-time viewers. The purpose of this masterclass series is to tackle the challenges of today's increasingly complex supply chain, bringing you best practices and innovative thinking from academics like myself, as well as industry insiders and senior leaders like John. Maybe no topic is as perplexing today as delivering on the multiple bottom lines that sustainability presents, meeting our business objectives, conserving our physical environment, and looking out for the well-being of our associates, supply chain partners, and larger society and communities in which we operate. Our intention is to educate and inform, illuminating how the pursuit of sustainability done well can advance your business. You can see that we have one more session in this masterclass series. Today's session is the third of 4. We're going to conclude the masterclass with a session on paper-free warehouses next Thursday, February 25. And if you go to the chat window, you can see that we have a link where you can register now for next Thursday's webinar. Also, I'm just going to remind you that we've got a wide array of previously concluded masterclass sessions that are available. You see 6 different topics covering a wide spectrum of areas that perhaps you and your organization have been dealing with. And just know that there are multiple class sessions in each one of these masterclass series dedicated to discussing how advanced thinking and technology can address these complexities. So with that understanding, let's quickly go over some housekeeping items. And just as today's session is being recorded, all those previous sessions are recorded and available to you on demand. Allow us about 48 hours to get this video ready, and then it'll be out there on the web available for you to view and share. All of your phone lines are muted out there, so don't worry about the noise and cacophony you might have in the background behind you. Don't worry about that. However, we would like to hear from you in the form of questions. So if you've got a question for John, just go to the GoToWebinar menu and enter your question. I'll be monitoring that window, and we'll dedicate a few minutes at the end of today's session to address those questions. Also, while you're in the GoToWebinar menu, check out the handout tab. Talk about the cacophony in the background. It's logistics going on behind me. I've got a train that's roaring through town here, so please excuse the noise. But go to the handout tab to find today's handout titled "Doing More with Less: Using Innovative Technology to Overcome Warehouse Labor Challenges." Hey, let's get back to that poll question. We opened up with a poll asking, what is the purpose of dark warehouses in supply chain? And 2/3 of you, 67%, said to run a full warehouse with no labor and full automation. And that, I believe, is the premise I brought to the topic, and John's going to be bringing his own understanding of dark warehouses. We did have 17% said to add an extra shift with limited labor. Another 17% said to run a limited SKU warehouse completely dark. We didn't have anyone that suggested other or none of the above. So John, our responses were concentrated in those first 3 answers. So I guess we did a pretty good job at anticipating maybe what people might say. But I was just curious, any reaction to our poll question based on the results that you see there?
No, I think, Tom, as you and I have talked about preparing for this webinar and so forth, I think the idea is pretty understood, right? Automation, eliminating labor, allowing the location to run, lights off, so to speak. And I think hopefully we'll get into that a little bit here in the next few minutes.
For sure. Well, thanks for that input. Hey, let me frame up the topic with a little bit of content on my own. And our survey question really kind of gets at the heart of the demands that we're seeing throughout our supply chains, in our points of storage, order fulfillment. This graph that will appear before you here kind of suggests that warehousing and storage are on the rise, and they absolutely are. If we look at the money spent, in this case in the United States, but I think the argument can be made around the world at virtually any setting, we're seeing more and more demand for warehouse space and more e-commerce activity, which takes up more space and generally requires far more people. I think this graph of GDP growth for warehouse activity that uses 2009 as the index year at 100. And what you see is that as of where this chart ends in the year 2016, it had doubled during that 7-year period. I think if we were to see the most up-to-date data, that data unfortunately is not yet available to us, we would see an even steeper curve as we looked at the last 4 or 5 years of activity. If we could just look at the next slide, please, I'll cut it up another way, and I think John's going to make reference to this as well. If we look at employment, no doubt we're seeing a surge in employment in warehouse activity. Again, this is at the national level for the US, but I believe it also applies around the world. Yeah, there was a bit of a setback early in 2020 when we weren't sure what this pandemic was going to bring, but since we've only regained that employment and seen even greater heights reached. And just keep in mind, this is the last decade. If you go back to the beginning of this chart, the year January 2011, a little more than 600,000 people employed in warehouses in the United States, and it's more than double that at the present time. And I don't think it's going to end anytime soon, the demands on our warehouses. If we can just go to the next slide then, here's another cut at it. If we look at some Bureau of Labor Statistics data, the sheer number of establishments has also risen dramatically over the past decade. More and more companies getting into the warehousing game, and again, chasing a limited set of labor that's available to us. And that's then being reflected in the rise in wages that you see depicted in the right-hand graph. And I think also, as we see, frankly, more and more Amazon facilities where they're paying top dollar in many locales, I think that's only forcing us to pay higher wage rates and face some inflation from the wage standpoint. So as we're seeing more and more demand on warehouses and more demand for warehouses, it seems like something has to give. And one solution is elevating the level of automation. And so if we can go to the next slide, please. The dark warehouse is something that's been forwarded by many parties as a possible solution. And here you see a description of what we mean by dark warehouse, or also referred to as a lights out facility. And Ben Ames at DC Velocity magazine says that they promise swift or error-free fulfillment operations enabled by key technologies such as automated material handling equipment, warehouse execution systems, and automatic identification. So again, my premise here is just to say, hey, there's a lot of demand on warehousing. It's getting to be harder and harder to find the talent to do the work. We're having to pay higher wage rates. And there's the suggestion then that automation and intensive automation is perhaps the way to go. So John, I'm going to bring you into the conversation here. What's your take on automation and dark warehouses in particular?
Thank you, Tom. I definitely have a take there. It's always a pleasure to join you and to talk about cutting edge technologies and how it is really reshaping supply chains and warehousing operations. And in fact, could there really be anything more cutting edge than the idea of the dark warehouse? The term dark warehouse or lights out warehouse, I don't think it necessarily means a dark space. The idea is that the end-to-end operation has become automated to the point that it could feasibly operate in the dark, but more likely there's still going to be people involved in the process. Now, robots and automation equipment, they don't have eyes, hence the term dark warehouse. Some do have cameras, but robots and automation, they see, with a combination of sensors and more importantly, programming. Automation technology, it does what it is told to do, and it will typically operate quite precisely. The point here is that a dark warehouse is one that has been automated to the point that human interaction is minimized. Again, likely not eliminated. The construct of the labor force will change. The construct will change from operations execution. Example would be e-commerce fulfillment, picking products off of shelves, to equipment maintenance and monitoring. You sort of shift the type of employee to move from a more labor-intensive role to a more technically enabled role. We can go ahead and jump on to the next slide here. Overall, the market for automation is growing, and it is continuing to grow. And this is due to a number of factors. First, Tom, as you indicated, is the ongoing labor crunch that has really been plaguing warehouse operations for years now. Not only has the cost of labor been increasing, but the availability or lack thereof of labor has put strain on warehouses, especially during periods of peak demand. Prior to the COVID pandemic, there were hundreds of thousands of unfilled warehouse operations jobs. The overall market actually had more open job requisitions than there were people looking for work, by about 1 million. Furthermore, with the impact of COVID, this has further reduced the availability of the workforce and has increased the need for safety of people in the workforce, and therefore investments are being made to enhance distancing in the warehouse, and automation is that key enabler here. Next up is evolving customer demands. Right? Customers have come to expect a nearly endless variety of products and expect these products to be available next day, or in some instances the same day. This means that warehouses are really being forced to figure out how to fulfill a higher mix of products faster, and to do so within a labor-constrained environment. And the next 2 points are a bit interrelated, right? The push for modernization is really being driven by the current state of technology maturity. In a moment, we'll look at some of the technologies that have been driving this push, but it's important to keep in mind that the current technology landscape has made it imperative that organizations make technology investments to keep their operation competitive with the market today. Each of these factors are really driving the push for automation and are playing a significant role in the drive towards the dark warehouse. We can go to the next slide. So, drivers of the movement of this market aside, why would an organization want to make the investments in time and money that it takes to get to a dark warehouse? First off, efficiency. Automation technology are tools that are designed to enhance operational efficiency and drive productivity. The idea is that with top-line efficiency, the cost of handling each item comes down. In addition, related to cost, the more automation that is deployed, the more fixed the cost of operation becomes. With the absence of human resources, the cost of running a fully automated warehouse nearly becomes linear. It does not cost any more per unit to run overtime or to add an additional shift. In fact, the scenarios that make sense for a dark warehouse are going to be multi-shift operations where the equipment itself will face maximum utility. Also, precision, that becomes a major point. Automation technology does what it is programmed to do. Mistakes in the warehouse occur due to human error. If a machine makes a mistake, it was either programmed by a human incorrectly, or the equipment was applied incorrectly. That said, depending upon the type of automation, reliability can at times be an issue. Again, that comes down to proper application. For example, piece picking robotics. This technology is maturing, but is not yet at that 99.99% accuracy in terms of pick completion. But it would be rare to find automation make an error in terms of picking the wrong item. Instead, it may miss a pick and learn from that. But overall, there's a lot of different types of automation that go into the idea of the dark warehouse. And so, as you deploy this sort of technology, right, it's programmed for purpose, and when deployed in the right circumstance, the risk of human error, which is that big risk of error overall, is largely eliminated. And then finally, safety. which is an area that becomes significantly improved, again, due to the lack of humans within the operation. If people are not working in the space, it becomes pretty hard for people to become injured in that space. That said, mistakes can occur when people are introduced into the processes and even in the roles that they're meant to do in certain environments. A good example would be automotive manufacturing. For example, injuries do still occur with the automation technology. Oftentimes, that's because of errors made when interacting with that technology. Someone going into a cage to do a repair and not properly decommissioning the robot or taking it offline prior to doing so, resulting in an injury. Again, that becomes human error. We can go ahead and jump to the next slide here. I mentioned earlier the current state of maturity related to technology. We've been in the midst of a technology renaissance. I would wager that everybody on this call has heard the terms digital transformation or Industry 4.0 or digital twin. These are all related to technological evolution and how this evolution is capable of transforming business operations. In relation to the dark warehouse, we can break these technologies down into two categories: digital drivers and physical drivers. Digital drivers are those technologies that are based on software, things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, cloud computing, and advanced analytics. Each of these are software-driven technology areas that are really enabling improvements and driving us towards the modern warehouse. The physical drivers are those areas where improvements in the technology are enabling better, faster, safer, and more reliable pieces of hardware in the operation. These include things like sensors, the idea of the Internet of Things, that digital connectivity, enhanced vision systems, and improvements in overall motion control. Neither of these sets of technologies is independent from the other. And in fact, the growth and enhancements in automation technology is largely due to the relationship between the digital and physical drivers. The dark warehouse requires all of these elements in order to reach its potential, and they need to be pulled together in a way in which they operate in concert. For example, improvements in artificial intelligence, as computers become more and more intelligent, they allow us to deploy that technologies in new ways. For example, mobile robots, right? Artificial intelligence, as coupled with vision systems and sensors and safety enablements that are built into the technology, are allowing these robots now, instead of operating in a contained environment, operate a bit more freeform, meaning modern mobile robots are not constrained to a fixed path. They're able to move dynamically within the operation because they can sense and respond to their environments in real time, and this is a degree of that sort of intelligence. We can jump to the next slide here. So, we know why we're investing in the idea of the dark warehouse. We want to drive efficiencies and productivity, and rely less on on labor constraint. We know what it is, right? It's a facility that's highly automated to the point where human interaction in the processes is minimized and at times eliminated. And we know what technologies are involved, but the question remains, how do we get there? And the answer to this question is going to be different depending on who's asking, right? It depends on what business they are in, what are the type of materials they are handling, and so forth. There's no silver bullet here. But the biggest question that someone should ask is, do we even need to get there? At Kerber, we took some time last year to really think about and model maturity related to warehouse autonomy. In the end, we settled on the fact that the dark warehouse is not, in our opinion, a degree of maturity unto itself. Rather, it is a slight uptick from what we view as the top level of warehouse autonomy maturity that we consider empowered automation. Without getting into the details, empowered automation is about optimized blending of machine, digital technology, and human operator. This means that we believe there is an optimized state that can be achieved before reaching dark warehouse status, and that in most instances, the attainment of the dark warehouse and the associated costs may not add value beyond what would have been achieved in an optimized state. That said, to get there, you must first understand your level of maturity relative to warehouse autonomy. Then you need to think about your own operation and craft a strategy that takes into account the characteristics of your products. the demand characteristics of your products, the technology required to automate within your operation, and your overall operational strategies. Remember, no two operations will be the same, and therefore automation strategy must be different as well. Once this investment is made, it will become quite rigid. You won't be able to flex and adapt as you would in a less automated environment as easily as you would be able to in a less automated environment. And the biggest thing to keep in mind here is that just because you can automate something doesn't mean that you should. Can we jump to the next slide here? As with anything, there are risks associated with business decisions. Risks related to the dark warehouse include cost. It's very expensive to make this investment. And if the market shifts dramatically, this investment can be at risk. Time, right? These systems are not set up overnight. They take a very long time to design, to build, and to get operational. And again, during this period of design, build, and setup, market changes can occur. And alignment, right? You want to ensure proper alignment to your business. You don't want to automate something just because you can. It needs to make sense for the business. Over-reliance on digital technologies, right? This increases the need for digital security, and with an abundance of points of connectivity, you increase the risk of the operation. And then the fixed nature of this type of technology leads to the inability to adapt, and thus market changes can eliminate the value of such an operation. And finally, and I think most importantly, the human and economic impacts. These are perhaps the two most important things to think about. The objective of a dark warehouse is to reduce or eliminate human workers. When this occurs, the impact is not just on the people involved in that operation and their families. There are business owners that position and run their businesses to support the workforce in that warehouse. Should dark warehouses really proliferate and become mainstream or all over the place? Again, I don't really think that to be the case. I don't think it makes sense for many operations. But if it did, a lot of local economies that have been built up to support warehouse workforces would be severely impacted. So that's a significant thing to think about, more macro than executional, but still something to think about nonetheless. We can jump to the next slide here. To wrap up, the question now is, should the dark warehouse be your goal? The answer is probably not. There is likely an optimized state that you can reach before going to the level of autonomy required to achieve a dark warehouse. However, if your operation is highly predictable with a low degree of variance and you have very steady demand and supply, you may find it as a reasonable target. You will achieve value throughout the process of getting there. And at a point, you may also decide that the investment in further automation has become unnecessary. You will also find that while automation replaces workers in the warehouse, your human resource needs and skill set will evolve. They will evolve from a more labor-related type of skill set to, as I mentioned before, more technology-centric personnel. But overall, the idea of the dark warehouse is, I believe, incredibly ambitious, and its attainment is incredibly complex. It is reasonable. There are facilities that can do this sort of operation today, but again, it needs to be the right scenario. There is tremendous value there for the right operation. But as I said before, just remember, because you can automate something, it does not mean that you should. And I think that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
All right, fantastic.